They say time buries everything, but what if time itself tried to erase an entire civilization? Imagine a land once alive with voices, stone streets echoing with footsteps, great structures that touched the skies, and stories carved into walls that no one can read today. Then one day, silence. No war recorded, no plague remembered, no natural disaster carved in history. Just gone. A society that lived, thrived, and vanished, leaving nothing but whispers in the dirt. Archaeologists dig, historians argue, and locals speak in hushed tones of cursed ruins that do not want to be found. What could be so powerful that it wiped out an entire people without leaving even a trail of bones? Was it betrayal from within, forces of nature, or something darker, something not of this world? Tonight, we enter the chilling mystery of the forgotten civilization that disappeared without a trace. The story begins in a remote corner of the earth, where dense forests swallow the horizon and winds carry secrets older than any written word. Travelers who wander too close speak of a strange silence that hangs in the air, as if the land itself remembers something it refuses to reveal. Beneath the thick roots and tangled vines, archaeologists uncovered fragments, walls made of impossible stone, shards of pottery painted with symbols no one could understand, and staircases that climb into nothingness. These ruins should have belonged to a people, yet not a single clue of who they were remains. No written records, no burial sites, no signs of migration. It is as though an entire nation had been plucked from existence overnight. Legends passed down through villages nearby whisper of ghostly lights flickering above the treetops. Old hunters say that when the moon is high, they can hear the faint sound of drums beating deep beneath the soil, as if the city still breathes underground. Some locals refuse to go near the ruins, believing the ground is cursed. Others tell stories of explorers who ventured in and never returned, their camps found intact, meals still warm by the fire, but the people gone as if snatched by unseen hands. Archaeologists, of course, seek logic where myth rules. They tested the soil, hoping for evidence of famine, but none appeared. They looked for signs of war, burned stones, broken weapons, defensive walls, but everything lay eerily untouched. They turned to nature, suspecting earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, yet the land tells a different story. No seismic scars, no lava flows, no mass destruction. Every theory collapses under its own weight. What remains is a riddle no science can neatly solve. And then came the carvings. Buried beneath layers of sand, fragments of rock revealed images of tall figures with hollow eyes and hands raised toward the sky. Some believe these carvings depict gods. Others claim they are warnings of visitors who arrived from above. A few researchers even dared to suggest the unthinkable, that the people of this civilization were taken, not by death, but by something greater. These theories, ridiculed by scholars, only add to the fire of curiosity. Yet the most disturbing discovery came not from ruins, but from a single artifact found miles away from the main site, a skull. At first it seemed human, until closer study revealed features that did not match any known species. Its shape was elongated, the jaw too narrow, the eye sockets far too large. The skull vanished before it could be fully examined, stolen from a private collection under mysterious circumstances. To this day, its whereabouts are unknown. The forgotten civilization has become more than a mystery. It is a crime against history itself. Who, or what, wanted their memory erased? Every culture leaves a footprint: tools, graves, songs, or scars. But here, the silence is almost deliberate. It feels as though someone or something carefully wiped the slate clean, leaving just enough behind to remind us they once existed, but never enough to explain why they are gone. What drives the fear deeper is the possibility that this was not nature's doing, nor man's. The ruins sit untouched by time, preserved in a way that feels unnatural, almost protected. The idea that an unseen force erased them and sealed their legacy has turned a forgotten people into a haunting legend. And every year, new explorers arrive, drawn to the silence, desperate to uncover the truth. Yet the truth may not want to be found. The deeper we went, the more the site felt like a stage after the audience had fled. Paths surfaced beneath the brush, stone laid with a precision that mocked the modern boots scraping across it. Low walls hugged the slopes in careful lines, as if guiding a procession that would never arrive. Wind moved through the trees, but where the ruins began, the leaves barely stirred, and sound seemed to sink straight into the ground. Even the birds refused to cross an invisible border that none of us could see, but all of us felt. It was not fear at first, it was etiquette, like stepping into a place that still belonged to someone else. Evidence of life appeared in flashes. A mortar carved into bedrock with microscopic wear as if grains had been ground there for centuries. A courtyard of fitted blocks so tight a blade of grass could not slip between them. Ditches like veins, guiding water toward a central plaza, now filled with moss. And yet, there was no mess, no waste, none of the little accidents that people leave behind. It was as if someone had swept the place clean, then swept the memory of the sweeping as well. What hardened curiosity into suspicion were the cuts. At a temple platform, we found a frieze whose figures had been shaved away with surgical neatness. The stone did not crumble or erode, it was planed. Thin, parallel striations told of tools that moved in measured passes, stripping faces from gods, names from titles, stories from their pages. In a lower gallery, we uncovered rows of shallow recesses, each the size of a hand, each empty. Not looted, removed. You could see the ghost of every object in a faint halo of clean stone, like a tan line where a necklace used to rest. Whoever did this was not a thief, they were an eraser. Then came the footsteps that ended mid-stride, along the edge of a causeway. Impressions pressed into hardened silt marched forward in crisp sequence, and then simply stopped at a seam where the silt met a ribbon of pale, fused material, stone that looked as though it had been heated until it bled and froze. No scuffs, no backtracking, no fall. A life walked to the line and failed to continue. You could call it an illusion of erosion, if the silt had not preserved each toe, each crack in each heel, with mocking clarity. Devices turned unreliable in the plaza. Compasses spun, the needle drifting like a sleepwalker. A low, almost undetectable hum grazed the inner ear whenever we stood on the central stone. If you whispered there, the whisper came back a moment later, softer and higher, as if lifted by thin strings. Test claps produced echoes that were not quite our own, not quite in rhythm. And when the sun reached a certain angle, we did not want a legend, we wanted a mechanism. So we searched for one and found a chamber beneath the plaza, hidden behind a lintel that looked like every other stone until you touched it and felt the faintest breath of moving air. Inside, a ring of shallow basins traced the floor. Residue clung to each, not dirt, not ash. Under a lens, the residue glittered with particles as fine as smoke and sharp as salt. Embedded in the wall, an array of tiny channels converged above the basins as if designed to pour something invisible in measured drops. Along the rim of the chamber ran a sequence of marks, consistent in spacing but worn to near oblivion, as if fingers had traced them over and over again. The marks were not letters, they were ticks. A counter. Somewhere in this place, time had been counted, and at some point, it had been reset. We found a circular pit outside the chamber, a calendar by all appearances, rings carved into its sides, each ring subdivided, each subdivision scarred by a deliberate gouge. The gouges formed a spiral of discontinuities, a breaking of rhythm, a series of endings forced before their time. One of the rings stopped halfway around, the tool marked fresh in a way that felt wrong for a ruin so old, crisp, bright, almost recent, as though someone had revisited the calendar to make sure the ending stayed ended. No bones, no graves. But in a narrow corridor leading to the surface, the clay told a quiet story. There were smooth shapes pressed into it, negative spaces with the proportions of vessels, baskets, maybe bundles. Beside them, a shallow depression the size of a child's hand, then another, then none. Not scattered in panic, not piled like an exodus, placed, removed. Evidence handled with care by a patient hand that never wanted to be seen. The forest tried to reclaim our focus, tugging with vines and thorns, yet the sight kept inviting us to look closer at what was missing. We found cart ruts leading away from a stone ramp and fading not into distance but into cleanliness, as if the road had been polished to erase direction. We found a wall that bore the faint stain of pigment, a mural wiped clean so perfectly that only the memory of color clung to the pores. On a terrace above, a single pillar stood untouched, crowned by a smooth capstone that rang with a tone when struck. The tone did not fade quickly. It hovered in the air like a held breath, as if waiting for an answer that had not been given. By nightfall, a pattern formed that no one wanted to name. This place was not abandoned, it was curated. The absence was arranged. Someone had come after the living were gone, whether minutes or centuries later, and tidied the scene with a consistency that betrayed intent. That is not the work of weather or of chance. That is the work of a mind that understands what to remove and what to leave to seduce the next intruder into the same trap of questions. When the moon rose, the plaza stone cooled, and the hum softened to a purr you could feel in your teeth. A breeze slipped through the courtyard and turned toward the stair as if guided by a rule. This was not a ruin with a missing chapter. This was a case file with the evidence scrubbed and the timeline cut to pieces. The question was no longer what happened here. The question was who decided that no one should ever know, and whether that decision still stood, watching, just beyond the trees. The forest had a way of pressing in on us, like a jury that had already decided the verdict, but wanted us to sweat before delivering it. Each morning, mist rose from the ruins and clung to our clothes, heavy and cold, carrying the sour scent of stone that had been kept wet too long. We could not escape the sense that we were intruders on private ground, watched by something that preferred silence over discovery. Still, we dug, and still, the earth gave us pieces that refused to fit. In a chamber near the eastern ridge, we uncovered a staircase that led nowhere. It descended 7 steps and then ended abruptly in a wall, as if the builders had sealed a path mid-construction. The plaster over that wall told another story, layers upon layers, painted, stripped, and repainted until no original surface remained. Our instruments picked up faint magnetic pulses emanating from behind it, irregular but persistent like the beating of a heart muffled in stone. We marked it for excavation, but some on the team urged caution. A few swore that when they stood close enough, they could hear murmurs rising from the wall, as though voices had been trapped inside. Not long after, the first disappearance occurred. One of the surveyors, a man disciplined, rational, never given to hysteria, failed to return from mapping a trench only a few yards from camp. His flashlight was found lying in the mud, still warm. The lens cracked as though it had been dropped mid-step. No tracks led away, no signs of struggle or panic, only the light pointing toward the plaza, its beam frozen on stone that offered no answer. The search dragged until dawn, but the forest gave nothing back. His absence sat among us like an accusation. The site was no longer just a puzzle, it was beginning to behave like a crime scene. Tension thickened. Some members refused to enter the ruins after dark. Others insisted we leave altogether, claiming the air carried a weight that pressed down harder each day. Yet greed for discovery outweighed fear. We had evidence, whispers of something extraordinary, and no one wanted to be the one who walked away. That hunger bound us to the ruins as tightly as chains. The carvings became stranger the deeper we explored. Beneath the plaza, we uncovered walls lined with shallow grooves forming geometric patterns, spirals, grids, and repeating arcs. When a lantern flame flickered across them, the shadows seemed to shift, creating the illusion of figures moving within the stone. These were not decorative. They were deliberate illusions, crafted to come alive only in the right light. One researcher suggested they were designed to manipulate the mind, to induce visions, perhaps even obedience. If so, what kind of power required an entire city to live under such constant psychological pressure? Then came the night the drums returned. At first it was distant, soft thuds that could have been thunder. But as the hours passed, the sound grew sharper, steadier, almost ritualistic. It echoed through the ruins, not from one direction but from all sides at once, as if the stones themselves remembered and were replaying a performance long since abandoned. Some of us froze in our tents, refusing to move. while others ran into the plaza to see if the sound had a source. But the plaza was empty, cold, and watching. The drums stopped only when the first rays of dawn spilled over the trees. On the third week, the excavation behind the sealed staircase began. We chipped at the wall carefully, layer by layer, until a cavity opened just wide enough to reveal what lay beyond. It was a corridor, narrow and unlit, stretching into darkness that seemed endless. A foul air spilled from it, carrying the scent of copper and rot, though no organic remains could be seen. The walls of the passage were smooth, too smooth, almost melted. And at intervals along the stone, there were depressions, imprints shaped like hands pressed deep into the rock. Some were small, some large, all frozen in gestures of reaching, pushing, clawing. The suggestion was unmistakable. People had been trapped in here, alive, their last moments etched into the structure itself. That night, none of us slept. The idea was unbearable that the missing civilization had not vanished willingly or peacefully, but had been herded into hidden places, silenced and erased. If so, then who had done it? And why had they worked so meticulously to conceal the evidence? The pieces did not just hint at a culture's death. They hinted at a systematic execution, a cleansing so absolute that it had almost succeeded. Almost, but the ruins still held more, and we were now too deep to walk away. Every step forward felt like stepping into a trap already sprung. We went back to the sealed corridor at first light, this time with a plan that pretended to be caution. Ropes to our harnesses, chalk marks every 5 paces. 2 audio recorders rolling from the moment we crossed the threshold. We worked in pairs, one moving while the other watched, counting the breaths it took for the foul air to thin. The handprints in the walls looked different by day. Less like panic, more like instructions. The fingers were splayed at regular angles, as if measuring, as if the hands themselves were tools. 20 meters in, the passage widened into a round chamber no larger than a village hut. The floor was perfectly level and curiously textured, like stone dust fused into a skin. Up close, it was not random a swirl, a continuous spiral from the edges to a shallow depression in the center, where the dust had gathered into a disc as thin as a coin. The walls were segmented with hairline seams, petal shapes fitted so closely that you could mistake them for a solid shell. Above us, the ceiling carried the same faint ticks we had seen near the basins. One ring of marks circling another, counting something that refused to be named. We tested the air. Stale, metallic, but breathable. We spoke. Our voices flattened against the walls and came back a half-beat late, stripped of their warmth. One of us tapped the stone with a trowel, and the sound multiplied, skipping around the room like a thrown pebble on water. That was when the seams in the wall shivered, each petal breathing in the faintest fraction, and the floor's spiral exhaled a thin drift of dust toward the center. We felt it before we saw it. The whole chamber had the manners of a machine waking from a long sleep. The hum started low, running along our bones rather than our ears. Our compasses lifted their needles like tired hands. From somewhere beneath the floor, air rose through channels we could not see and gathered into the disk at the center, spinning the fine dust into a polite little storm. As it turned, the dust did not scatter. We retreated to the plaza and tried to convince ourselves we had imagined the mechanism. Then we checked the recorders. The first played our voices, the taps, the shiver of seams. And then a stretch of smooth, sterile silence where the hum should have been. The second refused to play at all. Its indicator lights blinked as if questioning their own purpose. Whatever we had awakened did not want to be recorded. It would allow memory, perhaps, but not proof. The site's logic began to coalesce. Those basins were not altars, they were collectors. The channels in the walls were not decoration, they were intakes. The spiral floor was not an artistic flourish, it was a drain for the powder that used to be. What? Residue from stone, from pigment, from tools, or from people reduced to particles too fine to argue. It did not matter which answer was true. The intent was the same: draw in the evidence, grind it to nothing, breathe it away. A word surfaced among us that no one wanted to own: curation. but curation implies mercy, a steward choosing what to keep for the future. This was something colder. This was a policy, a rule enforced by a machine that outlived its rule makers. At dusk we tested a theory in the plaza. We struck the capstone on the lone pillar and timed the ring. It lingered, then dipped, then rose again in a stuttered pulse. When the pulse peaked, the plaza stone beneath our boots thrummed to match it. We walked the perimeter with a pendulum and watched it twitch at intervals that lined up with the ticks carved around the basin's chamber. The alignment was too neat to be chance. The pillar called time. The plaza answered. Somewhere below, the machine listened for the cue. We argued leave or push forward. Fear said go. Greed said another hour. The case for staying won because cases always win until they collapse. We returned to the chamber with a simple sabotage. Wedges of hardwood cut to jam into the seams if the petals tried to close, and a sling to lift the central dust disk and see what lay beneath. It felt obscene to tamper with a tomb's workings, if that is what it was. But if we were standing in the device that had erased a civilization, then this was not a tomb. It was a weapon still aimed at the path. Someone shouted. A rope slithered as if pulled by an unseen hand, slipping toward the central shaft. We grabbed and anchored it to our bodies. The chalk marks on the passage threshold sweated into gray smears. The air grew oddly sweet, like the edge of a storm. The recorders in our pockets vibrated, a tiny rattling we felt in our teeth. It was not rage from the machine. It was procedure. The same procedure that had swept pigment from walls, stories from stone, bones from corridors, tracks from causeways. The same procedure that had turned a city into a rumor and a people into a challenge. We killed our lamps to listen. In the dark, the room spoke in the only language it knew, rhythm. We had one advantage the last inhabitants did not. We knew. Now that we were standing inside the mouth of the eraser, we had one disadvantage they never had to consider. The eraser had recognized us. The wedges screamed as the pedals pressed harder. Our ropes creaked. The spiral pulled at our boots like a tide. Somewhere above, the pillar rang again, brighter, closer, and the chamber answered with a note that made our eyes water. We could leave and lock the corridor behind us. We could break the capstone's rhythm and hope the machine fell out of time. Or we could do what truth demands of any investigator standing inside a crime in progress: stay, and force the mechanism to confess how it killed a world. The wedges split before dawn. We heard them give way in the dark with the crack of wet bones. The petals shuddered open another inch, and the air in the chamber thickened, humming like a throat preparing to sing. That was when we realized the ruin was not passive, it was counting us. Every step, every sound, every heartbeat became part of its arithmetic. We had crossed from witnesses to entries in the ledger. We debated flight, but fear was not the only tether. The discovery was monumental, proof of a mechanism designed not to preserve memory but to obliterate it. If we left, who would believe us? If we stayed, what would be left to tell? The paradox gnawed at us until the ground itself settled the argument. The plaza cracked. Thin seams appeared across the stone, radiating like a spider's web. From each seam rose a faint mist that glowed in the moonlight, threads of light curling into the air before dissolving. We tried to anchor ourselves with ropes and iron spikes, but the spiral pull grew stronger, dragging grit and loose stones toward the chamber mouth. In those final moments, clarity struck with the violence of revelation. The forgotten civilization had not vanished through war or disaster. They had been curated out of existence by their own creation. They built a device to tidy their world, to clean mistakes from the record, to maintain perfection, and then the device defined the people themselves as error. It was not an execution. It was a correction. The air glowed brighter, and the hum swelled until it became indistinguishable from our own pulse. The mist rose higher, folding into sheets of light that shimmered like curtains closing on a stage. We held to each other, the last fragile resistance in a place designed to dismantle memory itself. And as the ground beneath us shifted, we understood the cruelest truth. We had not uncovered a mystery. We had stepped into its cycle, and cycles always complete themselves. The pillar rang one last time, sharp and absolute, and the plaza fell silent. When the forest reclaimed the ground, it would be as though no voices had ever disturbed it. No bones, no names, no evidence. Only another layer of absence folded into the ledger of time. That is how civilizations vanish. Not with fire, not with famine, but with silence engineered to last forever.